May we begin?
We're in precinct 222.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
I'm Dr. Jim Willerson. I'm the President Emeritus of the Texas Heart Institute. I've been very involved in the stem cell work for 16 or 17 years, and a close friend of Rice's and collaborated with Rice. And on behalf of everyone who works at the Texas Heart Institute and the Baker Institute, Kirsten will repeat this, we welcome you to this collaboration and important discussion of House Bill 810, also known as Charlie's Law. The meeting today builds on previous discussions last year between Rice and Texas Heart Institute and the community, but today we'll address this House bill. Charlie was Charles Howard, representative in the House, enormous advocate for health policy and regenerative medicine. Unfortunately, he died before this bill was passed, but I'm certain he's aware of it and very, very proud. This bill, unanimously passed by all of our Texas legislators this past May in the House and the Senate, it increases access to chronically and terminally ill patients to experimental stem cell, I hope that will become regenerative medicine, interventions in Texas specifically. It's an expansion of Texas's 2015 Right to Try law. I want to recognize our group at the front table. First, Representative Tan Parker, author of this bill. Will you all stand so we can acknowledge what you've done? Senator Paul Bettencourt, and he was the sponsor in the Senate. Senator Charles Schwertner and Dr. Charles Schwertner.
Those are the same person, by the way.
They sure are. He's an orthopedic surgeon in the Georgetown area. Representative Garnet Coleman. Representative Coleman has been a friend of mine for many, many years. We've worked with the legislature on a variety of different topics. He's a very long-serving, very dedicated member of the House of Representatives. And Representative John Zerwas. Also, Dr. Zerwas, and he's an anesthesiologist, graduate of the Baylor College of Medicine, part of the Memorial Hermann Network years ago, but today he gives his great talent when he can slip away from the house in the Cypress area. We wish to thank the Hammond Foundation, Ann and Henry Hammond, for sponsoring this series today. The Baker Institute Center for Health and Biosciences has a very strong reputation and dedication to health policy, including stem cell or regenerative medicine policy. The Texas Heart Institute is a national leader in stem cell and regenerative medicine work. In fact, it was the Texas Heart Institute, Dr. Perrin, myself, and members of our team who treated the first patients in the world with severe heart failure, extensive coronary heart disease, and no other option for their treatment with their own stem cells. 2001, 2002, in Brazil, we took from their bone marrow their stem cells, and we injected them back into their heart with a special catheter called a NOGA catheter. This catheter is a very interesting device. We put it into an artery. We move it back retrograde into the aorta. Aorta is a great vessel that leaves the heart. We enter the left ventricle. At sites where the tip of this catheter touches the inner wall of the left heart, it measures the electrical potential and provides an estimate of the velocity of wall motion. It has a needle on the end of it that can be protruded and withdrawn. So we're able to identify sites in the human heart where it's been damaged but is not dead from coronary disease and inject stem cells there. This was the first such trial in the world led by the Texas Heart Institute. It was very positive. Patients who couldn't walk from here to the seats in front of me after this treatment were often jogging on the beach in Rio. We have pictures of them. They weren't normal, they weren't cured, but they were improved. Subsequently, about 2004, the Texas Heart Institute was given permission by the FDA to conduct the first clinical study of stem cells in patients with severe heart failure and coronary heart disease, the first such trial in the United States. And today we've treated hundreds of patients with heart failure and coronary disease. Dr. Emerson Perrin, my partner in this work, and he actually injects all these patients' hearts. And we have a very good team. Many members of it are here today. I'm not going to try to name them because I'll forget somebody, but we're very grateful to every one of them. We've joined together, Baker Institute, Rice, and the Texas Heart Institute, to discuss health policy, and particularly regenerative medicine, with the community, with members of our government, and with other interested persons. Our inaugural event was hosted in September of last year and focused on unproven stem cell interventions and the risks associated to the public, as well as the importance of clinical research. Clinical trials are a key research tool for advancing medical knowledge in patient care generally, but that certainly includes regenerative medicine stem cell research. When one conducts a clinical trial, it's generally at a medical school or a hospital. It's under the auspices of an institutional review board, or IRB, which ensures that it's going to be done according to a set of rules that have been approved by peers to the physicians, nurses who are going to be involved in this, going to adhere to the clinical protocol, not deviate from it, that it will be blinded, placebo-controlled research, so one can tell whether the research cells, regenerative medicine devices help, and also keep careful track of adverse reactions to what's done, including death. So that subsequently is available for public review and is presented, generally published, whether it's positive or negative, in national journals. It's a very important way to conduct these trials. Without that, one really can't tell whether something happens. I can inject something into your heart, and if it's better, I can find 7 or 8 others to whom it's the same, claim victory. That's not really fair. I didn't compare it to state-of-the-art research, and I wasn't blinded in the interpretation of the results, nor was the patient. This law helps ensure that these trials will be done this way, and I congratulate all of you on behalf of all of us. The results of these trials help healthcare decision makers direct resources and strategies in treatment that work best, just as our state legislators have done here. We remain devoted to this kind of research at the Texas Heart Institute and the Baker Institute at Rice, in conducting clinical trials, as well as educating the public on the important intersection of science, medicine, and policy in stem cell research at the local, state, and national levels. and for us at the Heart Institute internationally. I'm honored to introduce my collaborator. I have several collaborators, but Dr. Kirsten Matthews is going to assume the podium now. I think most of you know about her. She's a renowned fellow in science and technology policy at Rice University's Baker Institute, and she leads the Center for Health and Biosciences biomedical policy program. She has worked more than a decade on issues related to stem cells and regenerative medicine, hosting numerous events and publishing more than 25 papers on various topics. She has a long history of working collaboratively with institutions in the Texas Medical Center, especially with the Texas Heart Institute. And we are honored to be collaborating again with her and her team on important developments in Texas. Kirsten, before you come up, I also want to introduce Dr. Doris Taylor. Doris, would you stand? Dr. Taylor is the director, the leader of regenerative medicine at the Texas Heart Institute and the director of a cell and tissue biotechnology repository laboratory, where she oversees the use of thousands of patient samples, bone marrow, blood, biopsies of the heart, that we use in trying to make regenerative medicine, stem cell therapy better. She was the first in the world, the very first in the world, to show that one can take a heart or a kidney or a liver, and I think the lung, and replete it of all of its cells. So the organ goes from a red, moist, obviously active function, structure, to dead, pale, and regenerate that organ, heart, kidney, liver, by infusing stem cells. And much of the work that we do today is an extension of that, and she's a very important part of it. Thank you, Doris. Dr. Matthews.
Welcome, and thank you, Dr. Willerson. It's been a great pleasure working with Dr. Willerson. I've actually known him since my graduate school days, and then I realized that he actually signed my diploma, so thank you. I have a lot of respect for him. I really think he's kind of a treasure for the state. His research has been world-class, and I would say the top peer-reviewed quality. Furthermore, I consider him actually one of my science policy mentors. He really is, I would consider, one of the most influential scientists in the state, both for his high quality research, but as well for his public outreach. I think he's done well to engage the public and to engage policymakers as well, and I think he has an excellent reputation for that. So we are honored to actually work with you, with your institution, the Texas Heart Institution, and collaborate on these research. When we were contemplating who we wanted to reach out for this particular series, this was our first call, and working with Dr. Willerson and Ms. Sprung, Carrie Sprung, were the two people that we went to initially, and we were so happy that this was a collaboration we could do together. Like Dr. Willerson, I also want to thank the George and Josephine Mary Hammond Foundation, who actually sponsored today's. Without their generous support, we wouldn't be able to have these discussions, and we really appreciate that they even encouraged us to get together, as well as been able to sponsor the past two events. So my role here today is to moderate. Hopefully I can do that well with this distinguished panel. We have 5 Texas state legislators and our renowned stem cell biologist at the end to flank us as well. I'm also asked to give a brief introduction. I know that you have kind of a detailed introduction for our speakers, and Dr. Willerson also gave us a brief introduction as well. But I'll walk you through, and then we'll go through a few questions from the panel, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions as well. So I'm going to start with my left, which is Senator Paul Bettencourt. He was first elected in 2014. Senator Bettencourt represents District 7, which includes Northwest Harris County. And then, as Dr. Willerson mentioned, in 2015, he led the passage of Texas Right to Try bill. And in 2017, was the Senate sponsor of HB 810, which we're discussing today. Thank you for coming. Next to Senator Bettencourt is Representative Garnet Coleman from Texas House District 147. This includes downtown and southeast Houston, and he has been serving this district since 1991. Thank you so much for your service. He also is a current senior ranking member for the House Public Health Committee. In addition, we have on our panel Representative Tan Parker. He comes from House District 63, which stretches from Flower Mound to Greater Fort Worth. And he is a sixth-term legislator and has authored and led the passage of HB 810 for this past session, as Dr. Willerson mentioned. We also have on our panel Senator Charles Schwartner from Senate District 5, which covers a 10-county area of Central and East Texas. Senator Schwartner is the chairman of the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services as well. And our fifth representative is Representative John Zerwas from Texas House District 28, which encompasses northwest Fort Bend County. Representative Zerwas is one of only 4 doctors in the Texas House and has served 8 years, including 4 years as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Health and Human Services. And then our last panelist, but not least, is Dr. Doris Taylor. She is the Director of Regenerative Medicine Research and the Center for Cell and Organ Biotechnology at Texas Heart Institute. Dr. Taylor's peer-reviewed research includes cell therapy, stem cell biology, and tissue engineered-based therapies. So to start with our panelists, I'm going to start with our state legislators and ask if you each, in maybe 1 or 2 minutes, tell us all about your interest in this issue of increasing experimental stem cell-based interventions in Texas. And I'm going to start with the first person right here, Senator Bettencourt.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews, and I agree with you. Dr. Willerson is a national treasure on the corner. But and the research that he has done, as well as others in the audience, really have put, I think, Texas in the place to be at the center of a nexus of care that will be unprecedented for especially the people that can hang on for about 5 to 10 more years. So I look at Malcolm Morris, my other friends, you have to hang on for another 10 years, Malcolm, because when the permutations come from this bill that Tan gave us from the House, we'll have therapies that folks really will become commonplace in a decade, but will look to be, and will be revolutionary. My interest started from the fact that in 2015 I was the Senate sponsor of the Right to Try bill, and this is the same theory on House Bill 810, which is if you have therapies that are coming down to the marketplace, you really want to get government out of the way, but with enough oversight to make sure that good things happen as opposed to bad things happening. Now, when I look at this bill, and I just look at the research from the Heart Institute that had a recent meeting that I attended. The presentations are astounding. What you can do for angina patients, what you can do for patients with chronic heart disease are astonishing. But we already know that there's a strong link here for other cases, especially neurological disorders like MS, Lou Gehrig's disease, Parkinson's, maybe even autism, et cetera. And what gets me very excited is the ability for my peers and I to come to an agreement on what is going to be a next very important step for quality care for chronically ill and even terminally ill. The important part is that what you see here is everyone voted for this bill. But just because it was unanimous doesn't mean it didn't take a lot of work, okay? And I want to credit my House colleagues for sending us a good concept and my chairman for the Health and Human Services Committee to come up with one idea that we needed, which was good oversight. And I can tell you as a layman that my best day on this bill, besides the fact that it's very cool to have passed legislation that saves lives, because that's really the best day you can have, is when I came across something called an institutional review board. because I had been scratching my head of how to solve the problem, and as a systems engineering person, I'm trying to get a problem solved. And I can remember bringing that up as a possible oversight because we were looking at a very complicated federal statute and was impossible to deal with. And I want to thank my chairman for grabbing onto that idea and then attaching it to the Texas Medical Board to do oversight on this, which they're more qualified on that end of the table to talk about. What I just am really happy to be with is that there are great days in the legislature, and when you can pass a bill like Representative Parker's bill in honor, Joe, of your husband, that's a great day for all Texans. And it's a great day for everybody in the country because people that are now going overseas to get these treatments are going to be able to get these treatments here in the Texas Medical Center where they belong.
Thank you. Next up, we're going to go with Representative Coleman. Do you want to share some of your thoughts as well?
Yes, and I don't have much to say except, we've watched people trying to find a way to have a quality of life and a longer life. Many of the people are using what somebody might call experimental therapies, but that's generally not the case for people with chronic illness. So if you think about it, if you have somebody let's just use diabetes, and there was some way that stem cells could make somebody's life better, or brain disorders, some way that stem cells could make people's lives better. Those illnesses are chronic illnesses. MS can be just a chronic illness, not just, but a chronic illness. And so it's about making sure that people have the options that they deserve. The other part of that is giving them that option. We want it done in the safest way possible. We want to make sure as a state that when an individual walks into either a research study or walks into a provider's office or any of those circumstances, that there are a set of rules that everybody lives by that encourages the therapy, at the same time make sure that we're learning from the use of that therapy moving forward. So when Tan brought his bill to the Public Health Committee, there were several bills. You had three?
I think so.
Three.
It's like the best one passed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no. And so what I mean by that is they were all similarly themed. It could have been one bill, really. So I thought about it, and it was very clear what he was trying to do. And we know that people have gone to Mexico to get their stem cell injections. And, why not do it here rather than making it out of reach for some people to participate in those circumstances? So I think I congratulate Tan and Paul and with the help of others, for coming together with a bill that fits those parameters, allows us to move out there without a lot of barriers, but at the same time make sure that when people participate, we learn from it, and there's we find those uses that we need to find. One of the things that I was a little concerned about was the definition of chronic. So you can. But it's all good. So I voted for it. I voted for it in committee and on the floor. So, but it did kind of.
I think the whole audience defines now.
Okay. So yeah. So anyway, with that, that's my role, is just trying to make sure that we're doing it the best way we can for the health and safety of those people who are participating.
Thank you. Representative Parker?
Thank you. Well, it's such an honor to be with you all this morning, and I want to thank our friends at Rice and the Baker Institute and, of course, Texas Heart Institute for being a part of this, putting this together, and all the folks that made this possible. And most of all to my colleagues, I want to thank, of course, Sen Bettencourt for being my sponsor in the Senate, and for my friends here around me that were instrumental in allowing this bill to move forward. And so it truly is one of the great blessings of being a legislator, the opportunity to be able to do something that can make a difference in the lives of real people. And we're all very passionate about that. When you're able to get it right, to find the balance, as you heard that Paul and Garnett spoke of a moment ago, when you get it right, it's very fulfilling to know that you're making a difference in the lives of real Texans. For me, I'm not a physician, I'm a business person, but I really come to this from a personal story. My wife has suffered from chronic illness for many, many years, and really through her eyes and her experiences, I saw firsthand and started learning about adult stem cell and the possibilities of it. And then from there, that really opened my eyes to the importance of this for everybody. And to me, it became an issue fundamentally of medical freedom or medical liberty. Why can't someone that is of age have the ability to sign off, so to speak, with regard to a proper medical release on the ability to do something that can make such a dramatic difference in their life and their lifespan and their quality of life? And so just as we worked very hard in years past to address right to try for the terminally ill, I thought it was very important to now expand from the terminally ill to the chronically ill. And that really was the genesis of the bill, and then focusing, of course, specifically on where I thought we could get support broadly on the topic of adult stem cell. I thought we had an incredible coalition that was supportive of this bill. All the various life organizations, all the so many folks in the medical community, of course, so many of our colleagues were just extraordinary in helping get this done. And at the end of the day, again, I think it's going to make a huge difference in saving lives. I was frustrated to know that so many Texans that are seeking these kind of therapies, as have already been said earlier, are going to Mexico, they're going to Panama, they're going to Canada, they're going to Asia, they're going to Germany. And why couldn't we do these things here at home? And so, we would work to put together a bill that would address all these kinds of issues. Obviously, the safety issues being first and foremost, but also allowing access so that research and innovation can occur. And at the same time, we want to make certain that we address the possibilities of bad actors. And so I work very closely with members of the Attorney General's team to make certain that we've got various language in the bill that prohibits the outright sale of adult stem cells and things along those lines that only can be utilized in a physician relationship. We also put, I think, some good safeguards in place with regard to the executive director, executive commissioner over Health and Human Services in Texas, really being the lead oversight regulator, if you will, of the program, along with obviously the IRB process and so forth that you've already heard described. So again, I'm just very grateful to everyone in this room and to my colleagues here and all of our colleagues in Austin that we serve with for supporting the bill. And of course, I want to thank Joe. Let me just share with you just a brief personal story there as well. So during the legislative cycle, session is crazy. It's a crazy time for those of you who haven't been down there. We literally work around the clock to take care of the people's business in 140 days. And of course, when you're running the 10th largest economy in the world, we touch a lot of issues. And this issue, I had no coordination, so to speak, with Joe and her husband, our dear friend Charlie. But literally during the critical moments of session, Charlie and Joe were passionate about the importance of adult stem cell, that it could be beneficial to him and to humanity at large. And so literally, to my great surprise, wonderful surprise, one day I found that, Joe was there. We call it outside the House and Senate chambers, kind of the area where governmental affairs professionals will come and talk about various ideas. And there Joe was with her own flyer on my bill without any coordination, talking about the importance of it to all of my fellow colleagues in the House and then ultimately the Senate. And so I just want to thank Joe for that, and her, of course, late husband, Charlie, was a dear friend to all of us. And so it was your passion and that made it such a huge improvement in our chance to get it across the goal line. So, Joe, if you would mind stand for a minute, I want to give her a big round of applause. We all love Charlie and love serving with him, and he was passionate about the importance of this for Texas. And so thank you, Joe, for carrying his legacy on and all you did to help us. Thank you.
Senator Schwarzer.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here with you all today, and certainly with this distinguished panel. We have, I think, 4 or 5 chairmen here from the legislature and movers and shakers, so thank you so much for allowing me to participate. This issue of regenerative medicine, I kind of approached with 4 things in mind. First one, as a scientist and as a practicing orthopedic surgeon, I certainly have looked toward novel, innovative therapeutics to help my patients, whether it's bone morphogenic protein, allograft, PRP, certain types of scaffolds and matrices. And I've used them in my practice. So I understand how you can use life-changing therapeutics that might not actually be approved to benefit a patient. And so it's obviously very interesting from that perspective. But as the second issue is, as chairman of the Health and Human Services Committee on the Senate side, our charge as a legislature, certainly my charge as a chairman, is the public health and safety and welfare of the people of Texas. That's what we're there for, is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the people of Texas. And that supersedes everything else from my perspective. And so I want to make sure that those individuals that go to see a physician, for instance, all the regulatory agencies are under the purview of the committee that I'm honored to be chair of. And any sort of change from a regulatory standpoint is in conjunction with that guiding light of protecting the public safety. And then third, how this issue of state oversight versus federal oversight. Certainly, the state has purview in certain areas regarding allowance of therapeutics to come onto the scene. I think in this one in particular, if it's minimally manipulated tissue, it falls outside the FDA. I think the FDA is pushing back a little bit on that right now. And so that's an interesting area from a state-federal standpoint as to who actually has purview from proper regulation oversight. And then finally, an area that is really kind of the unspoken is the issue of profit in novel therapeutics. I would use the term that what we call selling hope in situations that are very tragic and difficult to deal with, and you can put forward ideas or therapeutics that do not have proven efficacy. And so how do we navigate the waters of recoupment of costs and profit and allowance of profit in novel therapeutics? I'm actually friends with individuals that are some of the principals of Cell Techs here in Houston. I know David Eller, and I know Dr. Stanley Jones, and I'm actually friends with some of their spokesmen, including Bob Lilly, for instance. And these are the individuals, that company is one of the companies that they actually have to go to Mexico to have their fat harvested and then stem cells grown, and then they have to go back to Mexico 3 months later to have it injected. Now, should we be doing that here in Texas? Absolutely, but with the proper regulation and oversight and knowledge by those individuals that they are receiving a therapy that is not been shown to be fully efficacious according to the FDA kind of trials and procedures that have been put in place for the actual protection of the people of our country and our state. So, thank you.
Thank you. Representative Zerwas.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with y'all and with this great panel of folks, and on a subject that I have just a very, very particular interest in. As was noted, I chair the House Appropriations Committee, which it means my life is all about numbers and finding money and passing out money. And more recently, it's been all about floods and how do we pass the money out in order to deal with the flooding issue and so forth. So it's a privilege and an honor to get to be back here at Rice and with this institute to talk about a highly relevant topic in terms of science and medicine. The most other recent time I was here, we talked about the HPV vaccine and the role that the HPV vaccine had in truly also saving lives out there and really bringing some greater attention to what the role of that is. So I compliment this institute and the collaboration that exists in terms of looking at very forward-thinking things that are going to have dramatic impacts on people's lives. My colleagues have covered most of it. That's the consequence of being at the end of the table and your name beginning with a Z. You're just going to have to kind of pick up the crumbs and figure out, well, what can I say differently from that? And they're also articulate. And of course, you've got the authors of the bill here that is, I think, a great demonstration of what is a terrific idea that all of us would say, how can there be anything better and more important than saving lives and doing it with a person's own tissues. Granted that it's been manipulated to some extent, but doing things as Dr. Willerson has described from many years ago that already sort of set the fire on this. That hey, there's something here, and there's something that we need to look at, and is going to make a difference in people's lives. Tan Parker and I are dear friends, in addition to being, legislators that came in at the same time. Very familiar with his wife's, challenge, and he and I had very personal discussions about this even before you carried this bill, as you recall, yeah. And so it's one of those things that you say, okay, how can we make this something that's really going to change lives? But as noted by, my colleagues, especially Dr. Schwartner, is that, we've got to be sure, though, human nature being what it is, that we don't let this thing run amok. And probably the most important thing in my mind is we start looking at, how can we really sort of accelerate access to some of these very promising therapies out there. The right to try is one of them. My wife went through a disease with glioblastoma and unfortunately lost that battle, which clearly most people do within 2 years. But there were things that were available to her, that weren't there before the right to try bill. But we knew they were out there, but because of some of the hurdles and some of the difficulties that were going to be entailed, we did not, go down that road. Not to say that we didn't pursue some very, very exciting and clinical trials out there that I think took a step more towards finding a discovery of what some of these intractable illnesses are. But I think one of the things that we have to think about, and as we've sat here and thought about this, is how do we be sure that we don't contaminate truly the process for discovery of drugs and the rigor that we put these discoveries through, so that when they do come to the public, they come in a manner that is incredibly safe and it's understood. Not to say that when it gets out there in terms of public use, other things don't come around to be discovered as being problematic. And we're all aware of some of those things that have happened. I think we tend to forget that once a therapy or a drug or some type of biologic goes out onto the marketplace and is used by millions of people, that is in fact another phase of determining, is this truly a safe intervention or a safe drug. And I think that has been taken into consideration in this bill, and I'm very proud that has done that, because we do demand great rigor, great discipline when it comes to bringing therapies out to the public, because they can be subject to some problems in that regard. But this is one that, I have to say, Dr. Willerson, I was with you early in my legislative career and talking about this. Every time I was with you, and since that time, since 2007, I guess, when we came in, Tan, you have always been a strong advocate for this. And this is just a great stepping stone towards, seeing where I think is an incredibly exciting therapy that's going to, I think, truly change things. And it's also a therapy that none of us have mentioned up here, but there are some other issues out there, largely social issues, on using these kind of pluripotential cells for the purpose of treatment and stuff like that. This is completely outside that social issue that people have concerns on certain types of cells that can be used for the treatment of disease. And so it's been one of those things, I would say, in my time in the legislature, although I dearly love getting to be the guy that works with all these people up here and passing out the money. My first sort of passion is science and is being a physician and having the opportunity to help people through, fairly difficult circumstances. So thank you for that.
Thank you. So now I just want to go down at the end to Dr. Taylor. And I would actually, since we've been talking about the potential for stem cells and regenerative medicine broadly, where we hope it's going towards, if you could really kind of talk to us a little bit about some of the peer-reviewed research that's based on, that they're talking about, that's kind of the basis for this clinical trials, or within the bill itself, some of the interventions that are being proposed, and maybe also touch on some of the challenges that you see in that space of what your peer-reviewed research is doing.
Absolutely. And if I could, I'd like to just remind people that regenerative medicine is unlike anything else we've ever dealt with. in the world of medicine. It's not like a drug where you take the drug and 6 hours later it's gone. It's been metabolized. Regenerative medicine strategies, therapies hang around. You can't take them back. Mm-hmm. So I think what that means is the burden of proof is a little bit higher. Because if you think about the definition of a stem cell is a cell that can do two things. It can make more of itself, and it can differentiate into other different kinds of cells. It proliferates, and it differentiates. The definition of a tumor cell is exactly the same, except that it's not as controlled. Now, what that means is we have to make sure we understand the cells we're giving. And I would say that the cool thing about this law is it's going to give us a lot more data. One of the concerns about this law is that we don't necessarily know everything about every cell that's being given, how it's treated. And so I think there are things that we have the opportunity to do to make it better. And I think about, I met Dr. Willerson when I was a student at UT Southwestern, and one of my mentors there said, every drug, I was a pharmacology major, said every drug has an effect you know and one you don't. And I would argue that every cell has an effect you know and one you don't. And so we really need to make sure we don't do any harm. And I'll go one step further and say, we don't generally pass laws to keep the good guys good. We generally pass laws because there's been a concern of some sort. So I think addressing those concerns is where we need to go. And the other thing is, you don't want a heart transplant by someone who's done 5. You don't want cell therapy by somebody who's done 5. You want these treatments by people who've done hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, and understand the implications. And so I really think the fact that we are making this available in Texas and the fact that it's tied to a hospital, a medical school, and institutions of higher learning is critical, because you don't want to go to your next door neighbor's best friend's clinic and necessarily get cells, because you don't know what you're getting. The other point I'd make is, why do we need this bill? And I think it's because 20 years in, we don't have approved cell therapies. I sat on the FDA Cell and Gene Therapy Advisory Panel for a number of years. And one of the reasons that we were discussing about why cells wouldn't be approved or shouldn't be approved right away was the fact that as soon as a cell was approved, it could be used off-label. You can give a drug for a lot of different things other than what it's approved for if you believe it's in the best interest of a patient. So if we approved a cell for cosmetic purposes, all of a sudden it was going to be used for a number of different things. And the data just weren't there. Personally, I'm a cancer survivor. I understand the need to find new therapies. And I strongly believe in novel, innovative approaches. And yet, I want those vetted. When I needed a therapy, I called Dr. Willerson. When I needed a therapy, I can call any doctor in town and find out whether or not it's safe. And that's what we need for patients in this field. Beyond that, regulation, 1998, my group did the first cell therapy in the heart anywhere, 1998, when I was at Duke. We did preclinical studies first. 2 years later, the first clinical study happened, but it happened in Europe. And 20 years later, almost, we still don't have approval. That's the problem. That's why we're having to pass bills like this. So I think it's our job to make sure innovation can happen, but it can happen safely. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to be transparent, what works and what doesn't work. Let's publish negative data. You can't publish a negative study right now. It's hard to do. You can't, so you don't know if a drug didn't work, a cell didn't work. You only know if it worked. I also think there are questions that we as scientists and clinicians can provide to patients so that everyone has the same information. And I think that's something that the Baker Institute and places like Rice and Texas Heart can help with. What do you want to know before you get one of these biologic therapies? Because you can't take it back. And then finally, science is changing. We're going to see more and more and more of these therapies, and it's not just about living longer, it's about living healthily longer. We call it health span, not lifespan. And really creating a health span for people is the goal here. But every one of us believes that if we get one of these therapies, our life is going to be the same or better. The unfortunate reality is that's not true with every cell. That's not true with every gene. That's not true with every matrix. That's not true with every biologic. So we have to have a way to get the word out about what's good and what's bad. And I think that's critical going forward, scientifically and clinically. And you're in the best place in the world to have that happen. But what I haven't seen is, I look forward to the possibility of a registry that really lists every single patient who gets one of these, and not only what they got, what dose they got, who gave it to them, where it came from, really capturing all these data so that down the road we can ask the science and treatment questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go back to my panel, and I'm going to ask a specific question for Senator Bettencourt. So you were a sponsor for the 2015 Right to Try law, and so I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on what you felt that was that particular law was not achieving, that you felt like that was a need for this new one, which kind of expands on it.
Well, I think the panel's touched on it. The 2015 law was a right to try for those that were terminally ill. And the expansion that TAN came up with, Representative Parker, was to move to the chronically ill. So this is a major step forward in Texas. And to Dr. Taylor's point, one of the things we put in the bill was that the institutional review boards will keep records, because we felt that was important. And really our eureka moment was to understand, at least as, look, I'm a process control roboticist. That's really who I was before I got drafted into politics. And when I'm looking for a solution, when you see one that you can tie the institutions in regenerative medicine to institutional review boards at hospitals, in institutes of higher learning, et cetera, you can then funnel that information into a common area, which in this case, I believe we've got the Texas Medical Board set up for that. So to go back to your question, what we're trying to do is basically, I called it quality of life, is better term is health span. And when you see the possible permutations with this type of regenerative therapy, and when you look at all the possible, starting with neurological diseases or heart diseases, and what I thought was really cool about the presentation I watched at the Heart Institute was you had both a European counterpart and an American counterpart talking about the same type of therapies, looking at the same results with the same curves, and they were positive. And that's what got me involved in this, because I make a pledge to my House counterparts that I'll go to Chairman Schwartner's committee with any good idea that they have, okay, as long as I'm in the legislature, because we will tune it up, all right, and we did so, because on the Senate Health and it's a very, just like Garnet mentioned, very deliberative process, because you have to balance what I think are great future benefits to the fact that you do have to worry about people and what they will do to patients, especially that are terminal or chronically ill. So I think this is a great Texas solution. I think it's novel, and that I didn't even realize this. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the United States, and I think it's important that we step up and try to make that difference, because I would rather have the state helping out with these therapies than waiting for the FDA to make up their mind in 20 years. Okay, we can save a lot of lives or certainly extend the quality of life for a lot of patients and for a lot of people in this room.
Okay, so next I'm going to ask actually Representative Parker, since you authored this bill, I'm kind of curious on why specifically you were interested in stem cells. And you mentioned briefly about chronically ill, but there's a lot of risk associated moving from just terminally ill, where we have kind of a defined period of time, for chronic, where someone can live, for instance, I think Dr. Taylor kind of mentioned, you can live with these cells, positive or negative, for a 20-year span. So if it's negative, it could actually really have a kind of a deteriorating of health span. So can you talk a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think in my opening comments I referenced a little bit, but let me come back to it. For me, my eyes were opened, again, looking through my vantage point of seeing my wife have a chronic illness for a better part of 20 years. And as a result of that, I've looked at various types of innovative therapies during the course of a couple of decades. And the promise of adult stem cell really was just extraordinary. Nothing really comes close, in my opinion, as to what the promise of these incredible adult stem cells can provide. And so that really was the beginning of my journey. And then from there, that's where my initial interest began. And then, of course, from there, I've visited with all kinds of doctors and physicians in the space here stateside and around the world, and gotten an education as to how it works and what the promise was for mankind. And, in terms of your question specifically about, the chronically ill versus the terminally ill, well, again, as Senator Bettencourt talked about, we were very proud of what we were able to accomplish legislatively as a team back in 2015 with regard to the right to try for these terminally ill patients. I mean, as many of you in this room have experienced yourselves in your own lives or with patients or what have you, we were seeing a tremendous number of cases where folks that, maybe had the promise of an opportunity to save their life with some of these experimental pharmaceutical agents that were now maybe in a phase 2 study, 2A or 2B, and we were looking and understanding that the possibilities were really great, that if we could find a way to expedite the red tape, that we could provide liability protection for a company. Many times these are startup organizations that have these breakthrough molecules, that it could make a huge difference in the lives of these people. And so the terminally ill bill, we work with a lot of stakeholders, a lot of experts. I remember having discussions prior to the session about this, and back in 2014. And the net of it all is that we just felt that good things could happen if we did that right. And I felt that looking at the landscape of the nation, the fact that there wasn't a state that had addressed the needs of the chronically ill, I felt that it was imperative on us to lead. And many times, many ways, Texas leads. We try to lead on all things, and we thought it was appropriate that we would lead because we felt that, candidly, that our legislation, our model, would be ultimately picked up and adopted by other states, and that would continue to spark more innovation and give us change in the dynamic, I should say, with regard to this federal oversight versus state oversight as well. And let me say this. I support the FDA. I'm a supporter of the FDA and their protocols and the regulatory scrutiny. Certainly the mission and charter and purpose is noble and good. I just believe that there are times, and I think this is a particular case with what we're doing with adult stem cell, that we need to look for more innovation and allow the states to be the incubators, so to speak, of innovation. And that's really where this idea, this vision, this concept, this passion came for me, again, was a personal journey that then took me in understanding the opportunities and what was possible.
Thank you. And now I'm going to actually ask Dr. Taylor if we go at the end there. I've actually gotten a lot of responses from scientists from outside. I'm a member of the International Society for Stem Cell Research, ISSCR, which is an international group of scientists that I get to participate in as a policy scholar. They seem really concerned about the bill. They mentioned it and of unintended consequences. I was wondering if you have any concerns and if you could kind of speak to that a little bit.
Well, I think, as I mentioned a minute ago, every cell has an effect, and one you don't, and you don't usually get the opportunity to broadcast your negative or deleterious data. So you can't publish it. You don't always want to publish it. And if you are a small company, I've started multiple companies. If you are a small company, if you have data that's neutral, those aren't the data you're going to push first if you have data that are positive. Mm-hmm. And so I think it is incumbent upon all of us to make sure that the therapies that go forward are safe first and effective, because one negative and it'll shut down the field. 2 negatives, it'll shut down a lot more than just cell therapy. So I think it's really critical. Look at what happened to gene therapy. One young man passed away because the clinical trial was not done properly, and gene therapy was put on hold for 10 years. No one could get even a clinical trial approved. So I think we can't afford to have a negative, and we sure as heck don't want a negative in Texas. So I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure it's safe and effective, and that's where bringing in people like Dr. Willerson and other. You think funding for research is hard to get now? It'll go down the tubes if there's a negative consequence, unintended consequence. So I think we have to have our eyes open and be willing to prevent that and address that.
Thank you. And we also have 3 representatives and a senator who are involved in negotiations. I know you guys have priorities that you were going into. Does it feel like there's enough oversight to make sure that we cover this risk that's kind of associated with it? And I know you guys were involved in adding some of the patient protections as well, if anyone wants to speak to that.
I'll speak to that since
Sure.
some of those were added on the Senate side.
Sure.
I think it's, as I said earlier, the health, safety, and welfare is the highest concern that I had when I looked at this bill. And we did put in the IRB, which is very important, as well as physician oversight and an appropriate facility, whether it's a hospital or an ASC, a hospital with over 150 individuals. So proper place of care. And data gathering, and so I think there is significant oversight. I'm also frustrated with the pace of the FDA and approval of therapeutics. And I've heard testimonials from people that came and testified, and so I applaud Tan and Paul for bringing the bill forward and what they did last time. And I knew Andrea Sloan, of course, and Representative Howard, and I think there is a place for us to move forward. I think the FDA is somewhat bureaucratically stuck in their approval process. But I think it is important as we move forward that we have those proper protections in place at the state level. My biggest concern looking at these type of that our therapeutics have not actually been proven to have efficacious outcomes is the overselling of them. And from a financial aspect, the money influence into novel therapeutics. There's, in orthopedics at least, there's all sorts of novel therapeutics, PRP and viscosupplementation for, putting it in the hip whenever it's only approved for the knee, or putting in the shoulder when it's only approved for the knee. PRP treatments and bone morphogenic protein. I've used it. It's only approved for the spine, but I've put it in a humeral fracture that I couldn't get to heal for trying to get a union on it. So these off-label uses can certainly be appropriate, but also in some cases when that actual compound's ever actually been shown to be efficacious in anything, then what are you actually providing that individual? It might be life-changing and therapeutic for that individual, but also in the worst situations it can be in an individual that's terminal or severely handicapped by a chronic disease, not only are you offering them no benefit, but you also are draining their bank account. So those are my concerns.
Pretty well said.
I might just comment further to say that, everything that's been said today, I concur with in terms of finding the right balance. I feel very much that the ultimate work product of all of us here at this table and members of the House and Senate, that we really did strike the right balance out of the gate. So, I'm very comfortable personally, and I think, all of us, as ultimately the final passage was unanimous, feel like we had something that has the right structure, that we have the opportunity to spark and support innovation, to provide Texans with medical liberty and opportunity, but at the same time, the structures that we provided with regard to the Executive Commission over Health and Human Services being kind of the regulator of the whole mix, if you will, in terms of folks that would look to explore these kinds of opportunities, I think was the right step. I think having the IRB process was a wonderful addition to the bill, and I think that, the fact that folks have to go to their current physician to be able to get, if you will, support from them to be able to actually move forward to this gateway, if you will, of being able to explore adult stem cell for whether or not you're terminally ill or chronically ill. All those things, I think, provide a lot of structure and balance, along with the things I mentioned earlier, working with the Attorney General and his team to make certain that we addressed bad actors and so forth. I think we really took a balanced view to move this thing appropriately forward.
Class A misdemeanor, if I remember
Absolutely,
correctly. Right.
absolutely.
Okay.
So now I'm actually going to open up for questions from the audience. I just have one request, is that you make your question in a form of a question. Usually have an uptick at the end. We don't like statements as much, but it gives everyone a chance to talk. Sir?
Could this have any benefit to cut nerve?
We'll let Dr. Taylor answer that.
Well, I mean, clearly there are anecdotal reports of individuals who've had spinal cord injuries, and the orthopod probably ought to speak to that. But there are clearly some anecdotal data that people have done better after some stem cell therapies. However, there aren't good published randomized controlled trials, and so nobody can really answer that question at this point.
So there are people that are actually doing this procedure now, or are we still waiting for something legally?
I think it's a combination of both. I know there is a clinical trial going on for an acute injury, traumatic injury to the spine that's going on. And I'm not remembering.
So there's some trials that were started 15 years ago that were halted because they didn't work. And then more recently, there are trials that have been begun and are underway, but the data aren't out there yet. So you don't know who got the treatment and who didn't.
I'll speak to that if you don't mind.
Sure.
The nerve regeneration, certainly individuals that have been paralyzed, it's a terrible tragedy, and they'll do just about anything to try to improve their situation. I personally have had a patient come back from Mexico that had went down there for a stem cell treatment. This is 03, 04, and came back, and this is years after their spinal cord injury, and came back, and they had a huge kind of bump over the back of their back, and I put a needle in it, and it was gross pus. It was, a month out from their, quote, treatment. So the they went down there seeking improvement and being essentially sold something that they thought could potentially benefit them. So those are the types of instances that you really need to watch out for if those type of things were to take hold in the state of Texas, in which you're trying to, from a profit standpoint, sell something to an individual that has a condition that is just, from an efficacious standpoint, not been shown to be improved by that therapeutic intervention that you're selling. So anyway, I have a person.
You still can't do it in the medical center.
Clinicaltrials.gov lists all clinical trials that are underway and registered.
There are certainly clinical trials regarding spinal cord injury that are in the United States, and I'm sure there's some that probably include stem cell, but it is not a common therapeutic intervention, and when to do it and how to do it and how much stem cells and where to put it. All those are unknowns that are difficult to really delineate, but something that often the average individual has really no knowledge of to ask an individual or a practitioner when they're trying to decide whether or not to open up their wallet for a procedure that's not covered by their health insurance.
And there actually is a famous case in New York. It was written up by the New York Times where an individual had a tumor with DNA that wasn't his. I think it might have gotten a new name because they'd never seen something like it before. So in the areas where we don't have as much data, preclinical data, that people are moving forward to, going to Mexico, going to other places with less regulations, sometimes actually your best outcome is no outcome. There's a lot of more promising areas, and I think that is actually what I think our representatives are kind of hoping the direction Texas goes. Do you have something, Willerson?
Let me just try to add a little bit to it. What you've heard is obviously correct. It's a complex area, but all of us should recognize that we're products of stem cells, every one of us.
Yep.
The union of our father's sperm and mother's egg generated an explosion of stem cells in a sac called a blastocyst. I think those cells were ordained by our Maker to be my brain, your heart, your kidney, your liver, your spirit, your humanity, every single thing about you. So when one says, I really don't believe in stem cells, they really don't understand. They're a product of stem cells. However, our Maker gave us this elegant series of rescue cells, stem cells. But about the age of 60, our stem cells are sometimes or often dysfunctional. Now that's a conundrum, isn't it? Our Maker gives us these cells to repair the brain and the heart and the spinal cord, but later in life, when we often most need them, they don't work. We're one of the ones to show that. We have rejuvenated, aged mouse cells where the stem cells were dysfunctional. Dr. Taylor's been part of this. With 2 gene therapies given to the 8 cells. And they revert back to an ability to proliferate and repair. There are also other factors involved in this. I'm going to give you the heart as an example. In your heart and mine, after 2 weeks of life, you were 2 years old. I'm sorry, 2 weeks old, not 2 years, 2 weeks old. None of us could significantly regenerate our heart if it were injured. And it's true of everybody on the planet except certain fish, salamander and the zebrafish. You cut the salamander's tail off, he'll regenerate it at any age. You can't regenerate your heart after 2 weeks of life to any significant degree. Minor changes. And we have found, Dr. Jim Martin in our group, our team, has shown that there's a stop growth pathway in the heart. It inhibits the growth of the heart after 2 weeks of life. What's the point? Again, I'm guessing, and I think our Maker intended for your heart and mine, and probably every other organ in the body, as a stop growth pathway, to be a certain size and not continue to grow forever. This stop growth pathway in the heart is called the hippo pathway. Talk about proper names. Unusual name for a stop growth pathway, but it's a kinase cascade. It's an enzyme cascade. If we knock it out in the mouse heart and create a heart attack in the mouse, he will completely regenerate the area of injury. Not 30% or 70%, completely regenerate, and no more. We wait 3 weeks after the mouse has a heart attack, and he's in florid heart failure. And we silence this hippo gene, silence the salvador pathway. He will virtually completely regenerate the heart, between 95 and 99%, and improve the function. This is a stimulation of existing heart muscle cells proliferate and grow, taking away the reins that stop growth pathway. We're into pigs right now with it. It looks very promising. but you can see where this is headed. If this is safe, we have to prove that it is in the mouse. And works in pigs and humans the way it does in the mouse. And I suspect it will. And it's a really important addition. And one might have said, you know, I can't, with these old cells, I can't really help it. But that ignores the knowledge that we can regenerate an old cell, at least in mice, look at humans. And we can very significantly repair the heart at probably any age, true in the mouse, when we're inhibiting this stop growth pathway. I'll bet you there's a stop growth pathway in the brain, the kidney, the liver, maybe even the spinal cord. What doesn't work real well now, just wait. And as others have said, including the center, we've got to find the right cell, the right time, the right way to give it, and look at factors that are thoroughly involved in this. But this is a story in its beginning. The end will be very sweet.
Back there.
Very good.
Hi, we worked closely with all the members during the session on House Bill 810. I've got one question specifically for Representative Parker, then a follow-up question for the rest of the members. Your original bill said the Right to Try Act of House Bill 21 during 84th regular session, has had tremendous success in saving lives of many patients with terminal illnesses. Just curious, a lot of us wondered who those patients were, and was it published in a peer-reviewed journal so that other people could understand what those successes were?
Thank you for the question. I think this kind of gets back to a comment that Dr. Taylor made earlier about the importance of a registry. So, you know, just like the previous question a moment ago, talking about what was going on with regard to spinal cord, you heard from folks here on the panel. I know of other studies that are taking place elsewhere in the world. I'd be happy to share with you offline. But the point being is that, you know, people obviously want to make certain that what we're doing obviously is safe. We obviously, from a scientific perspective, want to have a body of data. Certainly I'm a supporter of that. But the reality is that, you know, I visit with folks on a regular basis that have had extraordinary outcomes themselves. And visited even with the physician that treated them. And you'll see those folks are very comfortable to go public and talk about their success. You'll have others that after 6 months or a year after treatment have difficulty wanting to come back and share their data. So this is kind of the whole paradigm around to what degree do people want to share their data, what's happened with them and their personal experience for the good of mankind. I'm hopeful, obviously, always, and we'll continue to support greater transparency, these kinds of registry concepts and so forth, that we have data. But there's no question that I personally, in my journey in life, have met with lots of people that have had extraordinary outcomes. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for the question.
Actually, just to clarify, so there was no registry in the original one, but there will be some kind of data collection registry in this new bill that's associated with stem cells?
Well, again, we're talking about the IRB process.
Sure.
So the IRBs will have the ability to obviously collect data as part of the bill.
And if I could just add,
Before
I think,
and after on who receives it and the outcomes, is that what the IRB will be collecting as well?
Yes.
right, that's what the IRB is designed to do in this bill. And I think Dr. Del Pasi and maybe Dr. Levenbach have some experience with that. I believe there's about 80 patients, but I'm going from memory on what I've read.
Oh, and you had,
Follow-up
sure.
question. So would all of you members support a registry and new legislation next session? And also, do you have any concerns of this state law being trumped by federal law? And so if somebody does give an unproven therapy, you're concerned that the FDA will come in and shut them down or ask them to go to Mexico to give their therapies?
Any comment?
I think I would say on the latter part of your question, the federal government can always come in and trump whatever we do here. We know that. We've experienced that, and we hate that as much as probably anybody else hates it, you know. But sometimes those things are done in the interest of public safety, and we just have to recognize that as such. But the first part of your question was with regard to a registry, and would you support a registry? And I personally am a big fan of registries. I know that we do that with regard to cancers, and I think that it's a great resource of knowledge and ability to prove, things that happen and stuff. So I personally like the concept of registries. We sometimes get into a little bit of difficulty in whether you're in or out and have the choice to be in or out and things of that nature, But in general, I will tell you from a physician's point of view and looking at, just therapies and stuff, especially if you're kind of on the cutting edge of this, you want to be able to take a look at these things and collect the data, as Dr. Schwartner has said. And, again, just because we've proven it and put it out there, and it's being absorbed by the public doesn't mean that there's not going to continue to be some things that we have some concerns about. Registry is a great resource, in my opinion, for being able to deal with that situation.
That idea came from Dr. James Willerson several years ago. We take a lot of our guidance from Dr. Willerson and Dr. Taylor, so we would definitely try to support that and work with y'all next session to help make
Well,
that happen.
humorously, Trump being Trump, one tweet could open this whole thing up.
Actually, I have two notes for this law, and really it scared me sometimes about something very important we never mentioned in this meeting, about the rule of the insurance company. Can they enter with this law in the future? Let's say not now, but about the Medicare, Medicaid, will they cover part of this plan? Because I'm worried about the cost line here. This is on the side. The other question is the source of the steam seal. That's a very critical thing in the whole project. We have a problem about the source of this steam seal in some centers like in Florida. We need to know it will be restricted in one hand or it will be open in the hands of many companies, and by this we will be in trouble of who will handle this situation. Because if we don't know the source of the steam seals from where it's coming, there's a lot of questions here about that. So two things, the insurance plan and the source of the steam seal, if there is any answers for it. Thank you.
So I guess I'll take that here, and my colleagues can add some additional comments specifically to insurance. Obviously, we, as legislators, can't mandate that the insurance companies would pick up the cost for this type of therapy. And so what we're doing, obviously, at this point is obviously trying to spark that innovation to create that right balance, as we've been talking about here today. But ultimately, that decision is yet to be made down the road. And I think my colleagues would concur with that assessment.
I concur.
Right. No, I think so. And I just would add, obviously, the source, the bill contemplates as adult stem cell therapies being your adult stem cells modified and returned. So the obvious one that has the high, certainly high probability, the mesenchymal seems to be the right one that has the ubiquitous use that we're looking for, but I'll let the doctors and the researcher comment on it.
I'll just add that I think what your concern is the harvesting, handling, growing, and then replantation of the stem cells. And certainly there are different companies and different procedures within those companies, and they can be problematic if the company isn't following proper procedures that are proven to be safe and effective. Regarding coverage, I'm not exactly sure the procedures regarding Medicare coverage. I assume it would have to be FDA approved before Medicare would pick it up. There are coverage mandates in the state that the state can put on if they wanted to within the insurance products. That said, I think it's a pretty tall order to mandate from a state perspective coverage of a procedure that hasn't been shown to be fully efficacious and with unproven or unknown potential long-term issues.
Yeah, I'd just real quick, Doctor, just on that insurance issue, some of the most heated issues we have are around insurance and benefits and what can the state do. The reality is that even for some what we think are very important things that ought to be covered, like treatment of autism, a lot of people would say that should be a mandated benefit. In fact, we have taken that up before, and it's some well-proven therapies that are used to treat autism, very expensive and very long-term, but we take those issues up The truth of the matter is well less than half of the policies that are issued in the state does the state have the ability to create a mandate. And I will tell you, mandates, every person up here will tell you that's a place that can be very, very difficult to get to, even when you see a pretty well-proven therapy out there. But even if we all decided that, stem cell therapy is so encouraging and so exciting, boom, make it a mandate of insurance policies. One, everybody's going to pay for that in terms of increased costs, but it's not going to impact the majority of the patients, which are ERISA plans handled at the federal level.
So I think the FDA is looking at some of that, aren't they, in terms of expedited approvals, and the new head of the FDA is looking at phase 1 studies, so proving cells are safe or proving these therapies are safe, and then potentially pushing for reimbursement after that phase 1 during phase 2 and phase 3. So that would actually help tremendously.
Absolutely. And it's like anything, in my opinion, I look forward to where we are 5 and 10 years from now. But I believe ultimately, of course, you cannot put a price on human life and how precious it is in every way. But at the end of the day, I think that these companies will recognize it's in their best interest financially. I think the ROIs in 5 to 10 years will be very clear that patient outcomes are improved, ultimately at less expense at taking this kind of path, right, with various therapies. So I think in time, the market will address the issue, is what I'm really saying, I guess. And I would say with regard to your comments about source, obviously Senator Bettencourt addressed that, but I would also tell you again that I think this IRB process, I think the Texas Medical Board, when they adopt rules, in fact, they'll be meeting in the next couple of weeks to take up this issue in some more depth. I think all of that will provide structure and the proper safeguards that we're all looking for. Certainly, as from an author's intent, I want to have safeguards that we protect this properly so that we use the tool in the way it's intended.
Just as a clarification, but this bill does say that you could both use it, your own cells, but also a donor can actually give you cells. So,
that's correct.
Which I think might have a little bit more risk, but there's cases where you don't have cells that you could donate, I guess.
Sure. So obviously the autologous using your own, and then of course the donation scenario. And that's really, frankly, where we've spent a lot of time with the Attorney General and his team, is really working to make certain that we address that and put in place a structure, if you will, that was appropriate, that looks like the donation blood banks and so forth, that we have a known structure for historically.
Okay. Well, there's a lot here. So a student up here, let's go with you.
Yeah, so as a scientist, I feel like this bill is very exciting because we don't always know where the benefits of these stem cells are coming from. Studies have shown that if you inject cells in a place, they may not stick around for very long, but maybe they're secreting molecules that bring in other cells to make the repairs. I guess my question is mostly for Dr. Taylor. Do you think the reporting requirements of this bill will help scientists in the medical community really understand exactly where the benefits of stem cells are coming from?
I certainly think if we can collect data about which cells work and which cells don't, and understand what we already know about those cells, absolutely, it's going to start giving us insights into mechanisms, and then we can develop, wouldn't it be great if we didn't need to give a cell, we could just give whatever the cell secretes, and that would solve a lot of these issues. So absolutely, I think that's right on track and a great question.
Gentleman back there.
Two questions. The first, we've already mentioned several cases where people have been so desperate that they've gone overseas into different places. How did you create the informed consent process in this bill to truly be transparent in something that somebody who's so desperate for they're going to sign anything, number one? And number two, I think clinical trials have a success rate of something like less than 10% with pharmaceuticals. What's the success rate so far of stem cell trials as they look at it that gave you comfort that doing this is a low risk or a reasonable risk for those types of patients?
I'll speak just about informed consent. Certainly you can have stacks of paper about all the potential complications and issues, but really informed consent is a understanding to the patient satisfaction between the practitioner providing that care and the individual receiving it. Most medical informed consents are very lengthy, and legal documents that really are not all that informative to the patient, unfortunately. But the informed consent will be under the guise of the IRB and facilitated by the Texas Medical Board. As far as efficacy, and that's kind of the big question. There's certainly lots of testimony that we heard, and I've had actual individuals. I went to a cell tech seminar, for instance, in Georgetown, my hometown, and Jackie Sherrill was there as a company representative, as was Bob Lilly. But the thing about Bob Lilly is he's from Merkel, Texas, out in West Texas where I grew up, and I know him personally. I've treated his grandmother's hip fracture. I treated his wife, and I treated him, and he's been a supporter of mine for 10 years. And he's a no-nonsense guy, and he did it, and he said he got some benefit from it. So I'm not going to throw that kind of testimonial type of evidence completely away. I certainly am a scientist and understand randomized controlled, placebo-controlled trials and proven efficacy through scientific basis. But there's something there, and the potential has been eloquently spoken regarding mesenchymal cells or pluripotent cells, even I guess embryonic stem cells. You have to give thought that there's certainly potential, and in some individuals it appears to have some significant efficacy. But as far as numbers, percentages, I don't know.
No, I just want to add that at the Heart Institute, when you look at the volume of data that's coming through from multiple sources and researchers, John, all over the world, that clearly would indicate a higher than 10% success rate on a trial. And for the student out there, there's a book by Dr. Reardon. There's I'll remember the title in a little bit, but there's a very good chapter on coatings and proteins that are around the stem cells. If you already read it. Okay, very good. Thanks. Okay.
I just further on, just to say, again, to answer the question, I think Dr. Schwartner answered very well on the informed consent, but again, the structure that we have in place, I think will address that. Keep in mind that, it doesn't matter whether or not you're terminally ill or you're chronically ill, you need to first get that signed off from the doctor, right? So that physician is, obviously will use a lot of latitude, whether or not it makes the right decision for this patient to explore adult stem cell. So I think all these processes that we put in place that we've already described with the commissioner and so forth, all with the IRB and the Texas Medical Board involved, I think ultimately will end up in a good place with regard to informed consent. And I'll simply say that, in terms of data that's out there, I realize that we all want to see more data. I recognize that. But I can only personally attest to the dozens of people that I have met in my personal walk in life that are people of incredible integrity, that have experienced not just a placebo effect, but extraordinarily benefit. And a number of those folks actually testified during the process of this bill. I know on the House side, for example, there were a tremendous number of individuals that came out and testified, but I've had the privilege in my life of spending a lot of time with those folks. And so, again, I understand the importance from a science perspective of balancing privacy, right, with regard to the better benefit for mankind, for science research to have this kind of data. But I think in time we'll get there, and this bill helps us move us down the path.
I think I have 2 more questions left, so the one in the back, and then you. Okay. First,
as a compliance officer at Texas Heart, you keep mentioning IRBs, and that's my expertise. I want to know a little bit more about, does Texas Medical Board have its own IRB? There's so many IRBs that are out there. Can you please just explain to me a little bit better what IRB this is? Are we developing an IRB? How is the IRB coming into play? Because I feel like the term's being used a little loosely, so I just want to better understand.
I got 2 staff members that can give you specifics. But it is an IRB that has, I believe the medical board guys have historically been the individuals that allow for the approval of those processes, right? They're shaking their heads up there. They can give you very detailed information about why the medical board was chosen as the regulatory agency, but it's under the rules for it are currently being developed over the next 6 to 9 months as this bill went into effect September 1st, and as this this novel therapeutic endeavors will be allowed in Texas. We need to get the structure right. And there's a rule-making process and kind of some historical precedent regarding IRBs that is connected with the medical board. And that's where I'm going to stop because I don't know much more than that.
But I think the short answer is that they're being created, right? I mean, that we're not utilizing anything that's necessarily there already, that you're really creating, that that's the process that Charles spoke to.
On October 18th, the Texas Medical Board will be listening, will take testimony written from the public, so.
That is correct.
Exactly on that IRB question.
Right.
That's exactly right.
I think Dot had to quit there.
Yes.
I have a more basic question, and I'll tell you why. What are you doing to educate the naysayer physicians that are in sports medicine and other areas that see all of these patients every day that do not believe in stem cell? I'm going to tell you why. 4 weeks ago today, Walt had a complete knee replacement. And I was talking to the doctor, because we've been friends for years, that he does not believe in stem cell. On the other hand, 2 years ago, I've been a runner, or was at that time, 9 miles a day. I did some real damage to my Achilles heel, okay? I walked in a doctor's office in tears. I mean, I was ready for anything. And he said, Dot, you've got one of two choices. I can schedule you for surgery in 3 days, or I can try a stem cell. But you have to understand, and he went into all of the stem cells, explaining it to me and what have you. He said, it's expensive and it's not covered by insurance. That's one of the key issues you're going to have when you talk about that. I called Walt and he said, anything to eliminate surgery. So we did the stem cell, okay? That was 2 years ago. I'm back in the park doing my job. And I've not had one issue since then.
And Walt, let me just say this. You know, it's been 50 years since he walked on the moon, okay? And you all are still going strong, okay? And that's really what the heart of what we've tried to do here, what Tan's bill was, which is really, and why everyone's worked so hard on this, because, again, there are risk involved, because the doctor was right by laying out the risk, but you turned out great because you're back in the park and you're running again. That's what we want to see for everyone, and we want to see it with a structure that documents it, that there's data through the IRBs that's rolled up, that there's good oversight from the Texas Medical Board, and importantly, that the success of the treatments gets known, because that's the way to break down the skeptics. Because once those results are positive, and that's what we're looking for with this, because with any system, what gets measured gets fixed. And that's what we're really trying to do. We're trying to use a generic tool that people understand as adult stem cells, and try to open up the permutations to let to try as many therapies as we can in a logically controlled manner. So I think time will heal your skeptics, as it just healed you that you're back running. And more importantly, we want to avoid these things that Dr. Schwartner talked about, was because he's seen what happens when you've got these problems, when people are sold quackery, like the person that he had to fix from Mexico. But the bottom line is, I think that over time, that's why I was so excited about this bill. It is a cool bill. It is going to extend people's lives. It's going to help with their health care long term, and they're going to have a better quality of life, and that's what will change the skeptic's opinion.
Absolutely.
And if I may add, before you go to your question, we've had circumstances in testimony on other bills where people call themselves research doctors, and that they're doing research on injecting aviation fuel into people to cure cancer. This is an actual doctor here in Harris County. And so the reality is, this isn't that. But on the other hand, they argue that they should have the right to do that type of treatment to their patients without a trial, without anything, without any proof. So in order to stop that from happening, and he lost his license. But
I was going to say, because otherwise I'm going to start a spontaneous combustion problem with him.
But one of the idea of the testimony on that issue in public health, it was dead serious. You don't need a trial. You don't need to do anything. If I want to, inject you with olive oil, I can do. And they argued for it, not stem cell, not anything like that. But I mean, literally, they do their own research, their own trials, and they say this is my solution, and no one else should be involved in that from a research point of view. And we just don't do that. But that's different from this because this has structure. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out only because, when we sit, like Dr. Swertner said, when we sit in the committee and listen to people, we want to make sure that the balance is we have this group of people coming in and saying, we can do whatever we want. And then another group of people coming in and saying, we want to do this.
You wouldn't believe what they hear.
Oh. So anyway, I just wanted to just kind of throw that in. But I voted for this. I think we shouldn't take away opportunities, but we have to learn from it. And I think that's why the registry is very good. And also in our process, we do this all the time. We pass a bill, we look for the unintended consequences, and then we go back and we fix it. And I think that's the vigilance that must occur in this circumstance because, the unknown is the unknown. So thank you for your testimony on that.
So it looks like it's 10:30, and I guess I've kept you guys for quite a while. So I want to just thank our panelists, all of these distinguished legislators, and also our distinguished scientists for coming today, and you guys for listening to the conversation. Thank you.
Oh, we're dismissed?
You're just.
Oh, thank you.